boogity, boogity, get up on your feet.
Well, hello and welcome to another edition of the DW Show. Today, boys and girls, always like that. Who was that guy on Saturday Night Live who used to do that? Anyway, today I was going to show you a restrictor plate. I can't tell you how many times, and we've been using these things for a long time, since we actually used them back in the early 70s, and then again we went back to them in the 80s. But I can't tell you how many times people always say, what the heck is a restrictor plate? Well, folks, there she is right there. And I've drawn a circle on this one hole right here. That circle, that black circle on there, that's what a carburetor, that's the size of the Venturi in a carburetor. That's how big that hole would be if there was no restrictor. And so as you can see, when you put this underneath the carburetor, this sets on top of the intake manifold first, then the carburetor sets on top of this, and that's where you get the restriction because it will not allow the normal amount of fuel and air to go in the engine. Engines today, unrestricted, they make, let's just say 850 horsepower, and this little baby here cuts it in about half. And it's a necessary evil. Without this restrictor plate at Daytona and Talladega, we'd see cars running 230 plus miles an hour with today's technology. So it's really quite simple when you think about it. Of all the ways you could restrict the horsepower and reduce the speed and make it fair for everybody, this is the cheapest, most simple way to do it. You put this on every engine. Every engine is treated the same way, and so it's something NASCAR came up with years ago, and it works today. And it's one of those pieces that the only thing that ever changes is the size of those little holes, and they can make the cars go as fast or slow as they want to. Now, the interesting thing about one of these, when you watch, if you happen to be watching our speed show when they show qualifying, getting ready, these things are so sensitive that you can literally, and there have been guys that used to do this, they get their hands all roughed up like an old piece of sandpaper, and NASCAR would hand the crew chief the plate. He'd take that old hand and he has to have some kind of rough, almost sandpaper-like stuff on it. He'd rub that plate real good, both sides, and drop that baby on there, and that could be worth 10 horsepower. Just rubbing on it and knocking the rough edges off, those sharp edges off, that can be worth 10 horsepower. So today, NASCAR, it's a very sacrificial way they do it. They go in and they get the plate and they take it out and they hold it on the side and they take it over and they gently turn it over like that and ease it down on the engine so that no one can say that someone messed with the plate. It's one of those things. It's sacred. You just don't mess with this little baby right here. And let me tell you what you try to do as an engine builder, just real quickly. Think about a water hose. Think about a garden hose. If you take a garden hose and you line everything up perfectly, that stream of water would go right through that hole. It wouldn't bump around on the sides. It wouldn't hit the plate and splash everywhere. And so what an engine builder tries to do, and there's been all kind of trick ways they've done it, some legal, some not, is you try to take the carburetor venturis, the butterflies, the intake manifold, the whole package, and line everything up so that it's a solid, straight column that will go right straight through that hole without any disruption or without any sort of splashing or anything going on. Because when the fuel hits this thing and it doesn't go through the hole like it's supposed to, it reduces power. So it's a real crapshoot is what you do with these things. And there's been all kind of things been tried. They move the plate up and down on the manifold, which is illegal, side to side, which is illegal, and a lot of other things. Anything you do other than just drop this on the engine has pretty much been deemed illegal. So it's a little cheap device, probably costs $10 to make, and cost an engine builder probably 450 horsepower. So this is an engine builder's nightmare, and they hate using it. But like I said, it's the lesser of all the evils. And there are some people that think, oh, hi, honey. Do you know anything about a restrictor plate?
I know I'd like to have one right there, right there.
So now we know about the restrictor plate and where my wife would like to put it. And believe me, crew chiefs, they got a lot of places they'd like to put one too, and it's not on the engine, I promise you. Another area that every February that a driver has to deal with is his weight. Believe it or not, a driver has to weigh in when he gets to Daytona. And the magic number is 200 pounds. If you weigh 200 pounds and above, then NASCAR will not, they won't do anything to your car. The car has to weigh 3,400 pounds by itself, no driver. The driver, like I said, the magic number is 200. If you weigh 200 pounds, then your car will be a minimum of 3,400 pounds. But let's just say you're a Mark Martin or maybe even a Jeff Gordon or some of the smaller drivers. There was a time when they had a huge advantage, or at least in some people's mind, because they only weighed 150 pounds. And so that was a 50-pound advantage that a lighter driver would have over a guy that weighed 200 or plus pounds. And believe me, back in the day, the reason drivers back in the day had to be so big is because you had to manhandle that car. You had no power steering. You didn't have all the conveniences you got now. You had to set up in that thing. It's like riding up on the top of a buckboard. You set up in that thing and you drove, you got up on top of the wheel and you fought it. And you fought it to the very bitter end. And so big men like Buddy Baker or even Richard Petty and myself, Bobby, Dale, we're not big men, but we're bigger than most of the drivers are today. We had to be. You had to be able to lose 10, 12 pounds in a race. And you had to have upper body strength to be able to drive a car for 500 laps at Bristol with no power steering. So a bigger driver back in the day had an advantage. But as time went by and the cars became easier to drive, at least in my perspective, with power steering, and now you sit down in the car. We rode up on top of the car. Now you sit down in it with these big seats, and you don't have to worry about your neck giving out because you got these big head braces. We used to, you won't believe this, we used to take a dog collar, hook it under our arm, and have a little hook on our helmet and clasp it to our helmet, and that's how we held our head up. If you went to Bristol and you didn't have that dog collar, you'd be like this after just a little while in the race. And you try to drive going that way, looking that way. You can't do it. So it's kind of a primitive way of doing things, but that's all we had at the time. Now these guys, they got these big headrests and these seats that these $15,000 carbon fiber seats that they ride in. So it's a totally different, it takes a totally different kind of conditioning today than it did back in our day. So back to the weight. So what NASCAR did, some of the drivers, heavier, bigger drivers, complained that the lighter drivers had an advantage because if you put the car at 3,400 pounds and you put a 150-pound driver in there, you got a car that weighs 3,550 pounds. If you got a car that weighs 3,400 pounds and you put a 200-plus driver in there, now you got a car that weighs 3,600 pounds. And weight is paramount. It's horsepower to weight. That's how you make speed. That's how you make acceleration. The heavier the car, the slower it's going to accelerate. The lighter the car, the better it's going to accelerate. Lighter car, easier on tires. All those things are an advantage if you have a lighter car. So if you put a little light driver in the car, you're going to have somewhat of an advantage. NASCAR came up with a rule that 200 pounds was the magic number. If you weigh 200 pounds or above, then you don't get any weight penalty on your car. Your car will start the race 3,400 pounds. If you weigh under 200 pounds, for every 10 pounds, let's say you weigh 190, they're going to add 10 pounds to your car. So now you're going to be 3,410. And if you weigh 180, you're going to weigh 3,420 when the race starts. The maximum is a 50-pound penalty. So if you weigh less than 150 pounds, you're still going to carry that extra 50 pounds in your car. That balances everything out. That gives the heavier driver and the lighter driver, it makes their cars more equal. I totally don't agree with that, but that's what NASCAR decided to do because some of the big guys back in the day started complaining about these little guys. I think Danica Patrick, even in Indy cars, Robbie Gordon made a big deal in Indy 5 or 6 years ago, whenever it was, about how light Danica was. She weighed 100 pounds, and Robbie probably weighed 200 pounds, so that's a 100-pound weight disadvantage right there. And he made a big stink about it at Indy. So equaling out the cars, it's another one of those parity things. I hate parity. You like parity? You know what parity is? How can you have a race and how can you have competition if you have parity? You can't. Not in my mind anyway. I think you got to work hard, you get an advantage, and then that's how you win. NASCAR doesn't see it that way. They want everybody to have the same. Cars got to weigh the same, restrictor plate, aero, everything's got to be the same. Not very compelling if you ask me, but that's just me. And that's why I'm doing what I'm doing now. And by the way, they never call me and ask me about these things, so it's just my opinion.